Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. After a successful inaugural session on International Symposium on Competitiveness of North Indian states to achieve inclusive growth, I welcome you all to session 1 of the conference. So first and foremost, I would like to welcome on stage our eminent speakers for the session. I would like to welcome the Honorable Chair, Ambassador Paramjeet Singh Sahai, who's a retired IFS officer. The lead presenter for the session is Ms. Anushri Sinha, Senior Fellow, National Council of Applied Economic Research. And the other panelists include Mr. Daniel Mitchell, Chairman, Center for Freedom and Prosperity, Mr. Gopal Krishna Agarwal, National Spokesperson, Economic Affairs, BJP, Mr. Anup Nautiyal, Founder, Gati Foundation, Mr. Amit Kapoor, Honorary Chairman for Institute of Competitiveness. And thank you for being here. I now request the Honorable Chair to take forward the proceedings. Thank you. Also, just one house announcement for all the panelists, that my colleague has a buzzer in his hand, so he would be pressing the buzzer after 9 minutes, and the second buzzer would be pressed at the end of the 10th minute. Thank you so much.
Hello. Fellow panelists and the members in the audience, I think I'm very happy to start the day. It's rather early for many of you, but I see that you are in good spirits. When I was coming in the morning, I had a look at some of the Indian newspapers, I think which are very relevant for today's discussion. One was a cartoon in the Hindu, where they're showing the cold climate in Davos. And our Prime Minister making the statement, we have a warm investment climate. I hope it is true, see what he's saying. If not, it can be made true. Secondly, there's another item which said US slaps steep tariffs on imported washers or banners. We're talking of EoDB in India. I presume there's a need for a study on the EoDB in the USA also. Because sometimes I think perceptions is what you do and see what I'm to see. You want all the changes, but at your end, you see, you do not want to make the changes or you do not see that. Then there's another article in the context of meeting of ASEAN heads. And I think the message from Kishore Membuan, whom I knew about myself and all in Singapore, who was the foreign secretary, is that what's very important is commitment, you see, to do things and to work in a positive atmosphere. I think and then of course, there are other items where before that Mohali is going to be another, you see, Silicon Valley. So we have an atmosphere, a climate, where a lot of things are happening in a positive way. Today's session, the first session, is basically concerned with looking at the EoDB in 4 areas. So I think I would only make the request, Tracy, to you to make comments which are more relevant to that area rather than giving a broad view of the whole situation. I think the 4 areas are finance, electricity, labor, and transport. I'm sure that some of you would have already seen the studies made by cuts in the 6 states, by the NCAER in the 14 states, in the south and the north, you see, pointing out to see what is happening or what is not happening in these areas, coming out with recommendations and things like that. So I think you can rely on that. So you do not have to repeat what has already been said because the time constraint and things like that, you see. There are problems on the government side. Sometimes we repeat the same thing again, you see. I think what we have to do properly, if we can come out of this session, would we see what we could come out with positive recommendations. I would say what is doable. We all live in a world where it is easier. I think we will say theoretically, I had some professors from the university of Punjab University from Patiala, and they give the message, you see, that this should be done, you see, but I think the question is why it has not been done. I think we always repeat, you see, I think our aim should be to see what is doable. If it is not doable, to move on. Rather than talking the same thing, the same constraints, bureaucracy not working. I think I believe for the last time I'm part of bureaucracy also. I think we did work also at times. You see, I won't say that it doesn't work. We're not working, the thing won't be there. But we have to move in that direction. And our main focus here should be on how we are involving the states. States learning from the practice here, what we done in different states. Also, but sometimes I think I like to be cautious that, when I was in the United States, I would say that they would ask us to do this, and we would say do this. You cannot, you see, bring America to India, nor you can take India to America, I think. We have to keep those constraints, the practical constraints in view. And I won't at this stage make more comments. I would say that one thing is that from my personal experience, I have seen in Singapore and Malaysia that the states have a role to play, and I think where they are directly involved, you see, we have seen some results. We have to learn from others, but at the same time, we have to adapt the same to suit our local conditions. We just can't transplant something like that. I would say more than this at this initial stage, and maybe I'll come back at the later part to make some points, some suggestions, you see, based on how things move. I think we're requesting there are five speakers. They can speak for 10 minutes each, and I think the buzzer will ring 1 minute before that. And I think what ultimately more important would be interaction. I think any conference, I made a success at the interaction level. Because you have to be the participant, you have to give the message. And this is what I sense when I talk to some other people. They say that they do not have an opportunity to give their views. I'm a bit surprised. We have the government, we have the chambers of commerce, we have the think tanks, you see, cards and everything. And still, if we feel, you see, that, then there's something amiss. If that is true, then how we can shorten the gap in that, you see, between what is and what should be there. I think with these words, I think I can say that we can start the process. And I think request the first speaker, Honorary Sina, who is a senior fellow at the National Council of Flight Research. They've done a big study, you see, for the United States government, UK government, and I think some of them what they have done probably may be relevant to see for what you are doing. The floor is yours. I think you can speak from there or compare.
Thank you, Chair, for this introduction, and thanks to CUTS for giving me this opportunity to make the presentation here and share NCAR as one of the major studies that we did last year for the UK government to understand the reform process in India. Basically, the study was to understand the success of the IPP's business reforms action plan that includes the framework for various regulatory reforms together with effectiveness of such reforms. So basically, the key purpose was to understand the level of awareness and then of actual implementation of the key reforms on tax administration. These were the main indicators that NCS study focused on the 12 states that I'll be just sharing with you right now. Tax administration, construction permits, transparency and compliance under labor laws, environmental regulations, inspection reforms, and contract enforcement. Now I realize that the agenda today is felt, and not every part of the felt, like finance, etc., might not be included in my presentation because that's not what we did. But in a way, it is looking at governance and overall governance issues and the regulatory process, both from the government side as well as the awareness that the firms have regarding this. So given that background, let me start with my presentation. So this survey was conducted for 12 states, out of which there were 4 northern states, as you can see, Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, and Rajasthan. And this study was quite comprehensive in the sense of the robustness of the survey. Though because of the limited resources and limited time, we could not do more than 600 forms. So we did 600 forms across these 12 states, and we also interviewed government officials who were responsible for implementation processes. So this was, I think, for the first time in India that a sort of a study was done together with the firms' inputs as well as the government officials' inputs. So what we found in this was that the perception of firms were, what you can see in the blue are the yeses. So if you see the yeses, you can see that it's not, if you just look at the, see there are many states out here, 12 states. Please concentrate on the states that we have, I've just now mentioned, Delhi, Rajasthan, Haryana, and Punjab. And the states are named in the sidebar. So you can see that Delhi is not really, on the terms of online information easy to access. Most of the states are saying yes, including the northern states, apart from Rajasthan, which is not doing so well. But if you look at does the state comply with the defined timelines? There again you see there are yes, but other states are doing better than, like Telangana and Kerala, they're doing better than Delhi and other northern states. So what I'm trying to say is there are improvements that can happen in the northern states. Now, general indicators, here what we tried to do was that the DIPP also had come out with their findings and had shown where there had been some successes and where was the level of compliance. Accordingly, we also did this for the NCR study, and we compared where the DIPP results are and where the NCR results are and examined if there were variations. You can see the variations are the ones that are saying no. So when there's a no, that means there's a variation. So these states again are, one of the states that really strikes out is Delhi. I mean, Delhi is not really, the results that DIPP had put up and the results that we found from the ground level were not really matching for Delhi. In hurdles for setting up businesses, here again we see that the northern states are not really doing as well. And if you see that complying with environmental regulations, so northern states are always saying there are hurdles. Definitely the northern states are somehow facing more hurdles that we can come from the audience and the learned panel out here. What are the major causes? I'll just come up with some of the causes out here. So one of the hurdles was approval to get electricity. Here also we don't see Delhi is doing very good in the number of days that it requires to get an approval. So if you look at the comparisons, Delhi is actually still requiring like 20 days. Though Punjab and Rajasthan is doing better with 15 days, but then it can go still better because Telangana is actually doing 9 days. So this comparison, it's really that you have to do, if you go for the best practices, then you need to look at the south. That's one thing that's come up. Southern states are doing mostly better than the northern states. And out of that, I think Delhi somehow is not really doing so well, being the capital as well as different state. There is a problem in Delhi still. And in terms of Rajasthan and Punjab, they seem to be quite similar, though Rajasthan is not doing so well in many other things, particularly in terms of getting electricity. It seems Punjab is also not doing that well compared to them. So that's one thing, and Haryana is actually here doing much better, mainly because of the hubs that's coming up in Haryana. Complying with defined timelines, if you ask that question down to the firm. So this way I've put this presentation is taken results from both the state findings and the firm findings. Now this result is from the firm, the earlier finding was from the state itself. I mean, we had asked that question to state officials, and that's what they've told us. So, and this is from the firms and their comprehension about how how much time it takes, and are they complying with defined timelines. And we find here again, is that Delhi is not one of the best, or in fact none of the 4 North Indian states are doing as well as some of the South Indian states, like Telangana and also, was it the state? So tax administration, that's another thing of the belt. Tax is a major issue. And tax administration, you can see that online filing and payment of forms is mostly fine for most of the states. But if you look at the helpline of filing returns, there you can again see that it's not doing as well. I mean, the yeses are pretty low for the northern states. Issuance of valid registration and certification, in this has changed, but as I just said that this was carried out in last year when GST hasn't yet kicked off. But if you look at it, and if you look at the VAT will be replaced by GST, the findings would not really, I do not think, because the process is more or less the same, and there are different layers of even filing returns on GST, and so I think as of now you can of course look at what's happening at GST, but for VAT registration again, we see that Delhi is now doing better, but if you look at Punjab is 7 days and Rajasthan. So in terms of VAT registration, in terms of the tax regimes, tax issues for registration, northern states are doing better. In terms of VAT refund payments, again, it's not that there is a lot of variation across states. So you see that Maharashtra is really doing very bad, which is not really North Indian states. But if you compare, Punjab is not doing that well. I mean, comparatively to what I've been listening to, Punjab doesn't seem to be doing that well. And after that comes Rajasthan. Complying with labor regulations. Now, this seems again that the compliance with labor regulations are somehow, we're looking at regional stories out here, but if you look at Punjab, you see that no is pretty high in Punjab. So there is this labor regulation issues again. Punjab is not really doing that well in terms of, is the firm allowed to submit a single integrated annual return, which is the most important thing in terms of the reform process, is how do you make a single window system, how do you make single returns, and there we do not see Punjab coming out as well. So the major findings that the majority of the firm states, except Rajasthan and Tripura, access e-platforms. And again, most of the online services are still be used in states of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Haryana, and Karnataka. So Haryana seems to be doing better. All states except Kerala and Tripura, which is different, allow single window clearances, but there is one issue, and that we have to go in more details, and some of my other studies have shown that if you think there's a single window system, you have to actually open number of websites. So that's another thing which is important. And you said the selection of firms cited that always they do not adhere to defined timelines of proven clearances. Do not always adhere. And large number of firms in Delhi, Gujarat, Haryana, Punjab, and Rajasthan, all these firms which are in the northern states, reported they faced hurdles, again as I showed. And across all the states, there are poor awareness of many other reform measures which we are not discussing today, but that was one issue. So the one issue that we actually came across, and was that in the officials, the state government officials themselves were not really aware of the process at the grassroots level. I mean, people who are supposed to be the ones who are implementing at that level, the awareness of the major implementers from the top had not really percolated down. So that was one major issue, and the friendliness that was supposed to be the part of reform measures, and that was what the government was trying to say, that you reduce some kind of these controls as much as possible, but encourage firms, etc., to comply. This was not actually coming through. That was one of the major findings. And do I have a minute, or that has gone up? So the last slide is not there. I think it's important key message is that NCR survey was of lack of awareness, as I said, mainly in Delhi and Haryana, which is the two northern states. An important reform indicator is allowing submission to integrated annual return on labor laws. Firms in northern states were more ignorant of this process. Lack of clarity on the inspection procedures and factors on which inspections are based highlighted the urgent need for raising awareness, both of the firms and also the government officials who are responsible. Awareness programs can further be encouraged, and this will encourage firms in gaining better understanding. Regulation and bureaucrats would be then, if you put such processes in place, should be forced to be accountable. And there should be, the officials should be more accountable, providing a similar essence. Enterprise findings of Niti Aayog, which I wanted to share, just that the essence was the same. Because Niti Aayog recently did another study on EoDB with the IDFC Institute, and they released this in August last year, indicated that enterprises and even experts have often been unaware of the initiatives rolled out by the various states in the recent years. Thank you. That I conclude here.
Thank you, Abhishek, for an excellent overview. I think one thing that looks significant to me is your perception that the officials themselves are not aware of what they are doing. If that is true, and then we can move forward. And this would be one very good for discussion when you open the floor. Other parts, of course, are there, but I think this is a very important part because I have to do the thing, do not know what is there, how I can tell other or hold other people's hands. So I think we move that. I think the next
I'm going to go ahead and just talk from the seat here. I'm actually sad this morning because this is the end of a very productive trip to India, and I've made such good friends, and I'm sort of thinking, when do I get to come back? And I especially am interested in coming back because it's really fascinating to study the economic policy of India. And when I'm thinking about these ease of doing business issues, of the very good data that was just presented, part of me says that there's a problem that India isn't thinking big enough. I think it's good that there have been reforms to move to a single window. But when I think about the way business policy works in some other countries, including to some degree in the United States, my question is, why is there a window at all? And think about it in the context of the finance, electricity, labor, and transport. In the United States, at least in most states, those aren't issues for government. If you want to set up a business, you set up a business, and you're dealing with other businesses or with employees, potential employees on these 4 categories that we're supposed to be talking about today. But there's no role of government where you have to wait for a government to say yes or no to something. So you just set up your business, you contract with the power company, that's a 1 day or 1 hour process. You hire workers, and that's just a market process, and if you want good employees, you have to give them a good wage, but it's always a tension where they want more, you want to pay less, but it's driven by market forces. Transportation, same thing. I mean, obviously, government plays a role in that, the road system and things like that, but there's by and large no big issues for you in terms of using air, train system, trucking on the roads, things that matter for businesses. So part of me is thinking, Why don't you just get rid of the windows and make it so that businesses can do whatever they want? Now, in the United States, that doesn't mean that there's no government there. Instead, the notion is that you have automatic de facto permission, actually de jure permission, to set up a business, but you are obligated to understand that there are various laws you have to follow. So you don't have to do a tax registration, but at the end of the year, you have to fill out a tax return. And yes, they will come and inspect you and audit you, and the same thing with environmental regulations and labor regulations. So there are various rules, and I think there are too many rules in the U.S., but the most important difference between the U.S. and India is the assumption that the business just gets to start up and start operating, and there's no barriers to the initial operation. You might have some regulation as you go along in the process. And then in the context of the ease of doing business, and in the notion of competitive federalism, which was part of some of my meetings here in India, I don't want to suggest that you follow the United States, because I think we've been moving in the wrong direction. Our central government is getting more and more power. My suggestion to you instead would be to copy Switzerland, because in Switzerland you have genuine decentralization. The cantons, their states, the cantons are the ones that make the decisions of how much to tax, how much to spend, how much to regulate. The central government basically does very few things, like national defense and sort of the overall operation of the pension system and things like that. Now, we used to be very much like that in the United States, and I actually think that would be the direction that we should go back to, because the great thing about decentralization is you get innovation and diversity and competition. I mentioned last night that there's this big bidding war for the new Amazon headquarters in the United States. And I just wrote a column yesterday explaining that I don't think it's a good idea for states to be giving special favors to Amazon. They're a big, rich company. I love free enterprise. I love profit, but I want companies to earn profit. I don't want them to get profit because they have special friends in government who are giving them favors. But you know what? Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe a state, Maryland just announced that it's offering Amazon $5 billion. $5 billion. One of the richest companies in the world are getting $5 billion from the government of Maryland, if that's who they pick. Now, maybe that'll work out for Maryland. I'm making a philosophical and ethical argument that I just don't think tax dollars should be given to rich corporations. I want to keep the overall burden of government low. But the great thing is, in a federalist system, whether I'm right or whether someone else is right, you have all these experiments going on. Some states might pick a lot of government, some states might pick less government, and we'll get to see through that competitive process which system works better. And I suppose bringing this back to India and discussing what's going to make India a rich country, what's going to enable the Indians who live in India to have the same economic success as Indians who live in America, who live in South Africa, who live in Canada. What are the policies that matter? And the good news is that there is a lot of focus on how to improve the ease of doing business score. And this move to a single window is certainly better than having 15 windows, no question about that. And India has improved from 136 to 100, but 100 is still not a good score. But the question in my mind is, so long as the notion is that you have to get the permission from government to do X, Y, and Z, you probably have a limit to how much. Maybe you could improve to 80 if you do a survey 2 years from now and every state gets good scores. That probably still only gets you to 80, because even with an efficient operation of the system, it's still a system based on a lot of regulation and government having to give you permission to do things. And I think it's much better to have a system where you just automatically have the freedom to do things, and then of course have to follow certain rules for health and safety and things like that. I think that approach is a lot better. But I want to close by sort of bringing it into the bigger picture. Because as I mentioned last night, if you look at the Economic Freedom of the World Index, or the Index of Economic Freedom, or the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report, there's more to economic policy than regulation. There's fiscal policy, there's trade policy, there's monetary policy, rule of law and property rights. I was told that Mr. Modi he used a saying in the campaign, minimum government, maximum governance. Do I have that right?
Yes.
That's actually a great sentiment. Because you know what it's saying? Maximum governance is basically rule of law and property rights, which is one of the 5 major categories in all these indices of economic freedom and prosperity for different countries. So if you have maximum governance, while you're getting the barriers of taxes and spending and regulation and protectionism out of the way, I think that's a recipe for great prosperity and continued growth for India. What you want to do, Albert Einstein said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. So in other words, to become a rich country, you need to have strong growth, building upon strong growth, building upon strong growth. Let me give you a statistic. If you grow 1% a year, think about a standard European welfare state like Italy or France. If you grow 1% a year, it takes you 70 years, 7 decades to double your GDP. On the other hand, if you have 5 or 6 or 7% growth, you are doubling your GDP every 10 to 15 years. So the key to prosperity is to somehow have sustained, rapid economic growth. And that's what the convergence theory of economics is all about. It says that a country that's not as rich should grow faster than a country that's richer. But the problem with the convergence theory is it oftentimes doesn't factor in economic policy. So what I would argue is that if India, which is ranked only 95 in the Economic Freedom of the World Index, just like you're ranked only 100 in the ease of doing business, if India can continue to move up and get a higher score, you're going to ensure that not only can you have strong growth today, but strong growth next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. In other words, you don't just want a little bit of convergence. You want convergence at Hong Kong and Singapore type levels. And I think that's where economic policy is really an important part of India's future. And with that, I think I have 1 minute left, but I'm going to be generous and give 1 minute back to show that we Americans can be organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I think I'll take 1 minute of yours this evening. But I think I'll say a very good presentation. I think we have the US diplomats sitting there, and I think they may not treat you as a good friend, since you have asked us not to look at America, but look at Switzerland. Maybe I think since the seminar is between India and USA, at a later stage, at the discussion time, maybe you could give us some example of one state in USA which Indians could look at and see whether we don't need a list of 10 states or 15 states or something like that, or if not a state, maybe the sectors in which we could look at it, because it's 3 or 4 sectors about which we're talking to the friend, which will be the best state to look at that and what you have done. I also fully agree with you that the best is the list where there's no government involvement. And I think our IT people are very happy that the government involvement was not there. They made a success. And our motto, I think, at the Davos is India means business. When I was in America, they used to say, the business of America, government is business. So I think if ultimately what you say, we leave it to the entrepreneurs themselves, no regulations in that, they are going to be the best. But unfortunately, practice doesn't happen. Even in America, so-called free world, we start talking of free and fair practices. What is fair? For who? I think these are all debatable issues. I think we may come at a later stage and see what's to be done. I think now I request the next speaker, to make you will get another perspective as seen from political party, the ruling party, so it's both political as well as the government's aspect.
Thank you, Chairman. My co-panelists and the delegates present here, it is my pleasure and to speak before you and meet all of you. The time, I will be briefly speaking some of the points within that time. I think the topic is very relevant. I participated in 2 years back in Jaipur program. And the government is also understanding that earlier we were talking of cooperative federalism. Now the government focus always is now changing to competitive federalism. That is an important way in ease of doing business and competitiveness of the states. Both, there is an integration also at the government level. We see in the implementation of GST how the cooperative federalism worked in Indian context, where the state had the power of the indirect taxes. That power was given to the GST Council. Center also offloaded its power, and a very strong new law has come up which will help the whole economic scenario, change the economic ecosystem of the country. And the states are also learning of this example of competitiveness. They have to work in this competitive environment of attracting investment within the states. Therefore, many of the states are now having investment summits. They have understood that. And now UP is also having a very big investment summit in February. And there they are planning a lot of initiatives with regard to new industrial policy, land policy. So many initiatives are being planned. So now more and more states are understanding this. Center is understanding. Center is cooperative and intermediate the cooperative federalism and competitive federalism. That is ultimately will give ease of create economic ecosystem in the country. Center also understand is the last mile connectivity delivery mechanism on the ease of doing business is the majority role is from the state level, whether it is the land allocation, whether there are permissions issue, whether there are compliances issue. With regard to indirect taxes, already with GST, many of the compliances issues have been resolved. They are being made through online systems, transparent system, technological driven system where returns, assessment, filing of return, then assessment, etc., and refund, etc., and transfer the account to the account, refund to the account of the individual, the organizations is also taking online. So, except there are some roles defined on ease of doing business with regard to center. They are more related to direct taxes and indirect taxes. Center is trying to do whatever it can. And under the GST, this artificial boundary of movement of goods is also that there was restriction on movement of goods with the indirect taxation with regard to transportation, VAT, OPTRA, etc. That has also been ultimately done away with. The movement of goods will now be very free across the states. And another role which the center has with regard to this business ecosystem is infrastructure, connectivity. The central government has very strong focus on rail connectivity, road connectivity, whether you see the national highway construction, even many around 20 airports are in the pipeline, which will give a lot of connectivity to the states, and Sagarmala waterways. So connectivity is an important infrastructure which the center can create and give benefit to the state governments. That itself is doing, and transfer of resources also with 14th Finance Commission giving majority of resources with the center have been transferred to the states. And under the GST also, the center has taken the onus of compensating any loss of taxation to the states. The states are now very comfortable with regard to any indirect tax ratio that there it is. So more and more resources are being transferred. Now what ultimately the government can do? Government can create an ecosystem of economic development. It is for the entrepreneurs, private entrepreneurs that have to work into development of these issues. So I think ultimately if the entrepreneurship skill is developed, they can work in that area. The government is at the central level, is doing whatever it can. And with regard to permissions, I think majority of permissions, there are no licenses at present. Ultimately, whether if you want clearances, environmental clearances and other things, that is only required. But for MSME, etc., the registration requirement has been done away. It's a simple self-declaration form which is being asked by the government to be filled by individuals, and if that declaration itself is just recording, because data is very important at the central level. Data is an important area which can create a big difference in the economic development of the country. So I think in this scenario, macroeconomic parameters in the India are very good. Whether you see the growth projections are very high, 7.5% across next year, and then 7.9% growth is expected in the GDP. IIP figures are looking up. 8.4% has been the growth in the IIP figures. I am connected with the bank also. The credit growth uptake has also picked up. There was a strong problem with regard to private sector credit uptake, but now it has taken up because there are several schemes and focused and targeted mechanism through which central government is trying to monitor credit to MSME sector with regard to stand-up, startup, mudra loan, with regard to credit guarantee scheme. They are all very targeted, and targets have been given to the banks. They have to put up their target, and banks also have come up with several schemes with supply chain financing, cash management, and the banking channels after demonetization. More and more transactions are moving towards the banking channel. So the integration with regard to cash management, etc., is also very good, will create a good ecosystem. The one important problem at the central level with regard to finance availability to the private sector was the resolution of NPA. Government has moved very fast, a very focused way in this segment. The question with the industry, etc., was it is not only the question of easy entry, but easy exit was also required. Where there is a risk in the business, where there is a failure in the business, there has to be a transparent system, there has to be a mechanism through which there can be a respectable exit for the business. The government, with regard to either insolvency and bankruptcy code, setting up of NCLT mechanism, the government has tried to streamline the process of failures of business also. They have tried to resolve the NPA issues. And after the recapitalization of the banks are now in a position to lend. Earlier, they had the liquidity with them, but their capitalization was a big problem. 23% of the stressed assets of the bank, etc., which form NPA, came from the industrial sector. So there was a big problem with regard to credit lending. Now with recapitalization and majority of resolution of issues through NCLT, etc., and IBC, banks are in a healthy position to lend. So credit availability is there. Government is focusing on a targeted delivery mechanism with regard to MSME. And some major initiative for financing has come for MSME is the new initiative, that is the TradeX. That is the platform where bill discounting platform which has been created by the government, where banks can participate, the anchor corporate can participate, and the MSME who make supply. So that there is an integrated platform where the working capital requirement of MSME is taken care of. There are many fintech initiatives that also the government is looking into, whether there are e-commerce initiatives. There are, in the services sector, I think there are tremendous opportunity for MSME. Government in itself is also resolving many of the problems with the stalled project from the initiative of Pragati. Ultimately, with GST and the data collection at the center on GST network, Aadhaar seeding, corporate data portal, e-commerce and credit rating, more and more data integration is taking place for the MSME and other financial corporation sectors, so that there will be better credit rating, better transparency and ease of lending, and even this will also bring down with better credit rating, this will bring down the rate of interest for the MSME sector. So I think on the finance sector, many things are being done. On the infrastructure sector, many things are being done. On labor reforms, definitely there are issues to be tackled. This is a very complex issue with the state of employment that the country has. More and more jobs have to be created, and that can only come through entrepreneurship development. That's an important issue, but there is a time lag. I think in this budget, the sectors which create more jobs like textile and construction will give more focused benefit from the government. On the direct taxes, the collection of taxes has increased a lot, and government can now look into better reduction in direct taxes, but at indirect taxes, GST has not picked up. There has to be more compliance, then only government can look into further reduction. So I think these are some of the, on the electricity, power generation, government focus on renewable energy is there, electricity to all villages, every house, power generation through solar energy is there. But these are the 4 important areas that has been flagged up by this panel discussion, and there are issues, definitely government initiatives are there. MSME is an important area where the government is now focusing. Without the development of MSME and the last mile delivery from the states, economic development of the country cannot take place. This is an important area. This discussion definitely will help us to understand the problems and move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal. I think you have filled in the areas which we have not talked about so far, on the taxation, labor, and I think you raised a very important point on the GST. With this, you will see there will be no competition among the states. Will that help or not help? And I'm getting worried, friend Daniel, then there will be no need for further conferences, you see, because then there will be no competition in the states. And my other point which I like to make here in this context is I think the seminar is called Cooperative Federalism and Competitive Federalism. To me, I think it should be a different way. It should be cooperative federalism and competitive states. Because I think all the states are ultimately looking up to the federation to get as much benefits as they could. So I think they are not competing. I thought, or it is not the maybe unless you look at the federalism as working in America and the federalism as working in India, and how they compete and how they do that. And I think another thing is, I think, yes, competition, ultimately I think is entrepreneurs. See, if they want to find, like even the US statistic data just yesterday, she mentioned that in 2016, I think the American investment to India has gone up to 28 billion from what was 4 billion in 2004. So I think there are ways of finding, skirting, and I think we talked about jugaad. I think India is good jugaad, and I think Americans probably must be very good in jugaad. Also learn from India one thing, how they can do business in India, even if there are constraints. Let me not move to the next. Anup, not yet.
Thank you very much, sir. A very, very good morning, everybody here. And I'm from Dehradun. I'm from Uttarakhand. So first of all, I'm very grateful to Guts for having me here. And for our American friends here, people from the hills, we are very passionate and we are very emotional. We are also very, very critical about our areas. But I don't know, maybe it has something to do with our mountains and with the way we are. Anyways, since I'm going to speak about primarily about the state of Uttarakhand, it might sound myopic, because on the one hand we are talking about the global world, we are talking about the United States of America, We are talking about this 120 billion people living in this country. This big country, we're talking about billions of dollars. So what I'm going to say is perhaps going to sound myopic. It might appear myopic, because that's where I'm going to end. So what I'm going to go through, it's a slightly sort of theoretical structure of what I'm going to present. I'm going to take you through a little bit through the overview of what is happening in the state of Uttarakhand. I'm going to focus a little bit on challenges, and I'm going to end with one specific recommendation. Call it a suggestion, call it a recommendation, and again I think that that this forum is really apt because we have representatives from the US Embassy, we have people from CUTS, and we are, I think, also very, very fortunate today that we have Mr. Agarwal here with us, who represents the ruling party. So we have three very important stakeholders today. And really my hope is that, when I end, or maybe when this session ends, if we can perhaps take this forward. So to come to the overview about Uttarakhand, and we are a state of 10 million people. So if I were to explain in a very simple way, how do these 10 million people live? So you just visualize a house which has 3 floors. You have a ground floor, you have a first floor, and you have a second floor. Because ours is a hilly state, it's a mountain state. But the entire state does not live in mountains. So roughly 30% of the people of Uttarakhand live in the ground floor, which is, aapko pata hai, Haridwar, Udham Singh Nagar district hai. The first floor of the state, which is partly mountain and partly what we call plain, is another 30% people are living there. And 40% people are living in the upper areas of the state, which is completely mountains. And when you talk about mountains, you talk about various issues. You talk about sustainability, very, very important. We are very proud of the fact that the Ganges, the Ganga, the holy Ganga, flows out of our state. So again, a lot of challenges. In fact, the central government is putting in a lot of, effort and focus into that, but we are not going to go into that direction. If you look at the entire country, there are 10 mountain states in India. There are 7 in the northeast, and then you have J&K, you have Himachal, and then you have Uttarakhand. You have spoken about Switzerland. Many people in our state tend to equate Uttarakhand with Switzerland, So that's just sort of, one connect. So this is a little bit the overview of how Uttarakhand is sort of structured. When it comes particularly, since the topic of the day is EoDB and so on and so forth, I'll very quickly also sort of, look at that. We've done very well. As a state, we've done very well for ourselves. We were number 3 last year, we are number 9, But I won't, really go deep into that, how that has happened. But it's a matter of fact and a matter of pride for Uttarakhand that we are the number 1 hill state in the country when it comes to undertaking these reforms. So we've done very well for ourselves. And then, what have we done in finance and electricity, labor and transport? As I said, I will not really go too deep into that. But let me straight away sort of dive more deep into the challenges. I think that's more vital. What are really the challenges? क्या चुनौतियां हैं हमारे प्रदेश के सामने? और एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती, one very big challenge is with forests. So 73% of the total land that we have is covered by forests. We do not have land. So when we talk about big industries, where will the big industries come from? Because we don't have land. And when it comes to forests, as Gopalji knows very well, with forests you have a lot of issues, environmental issues. You cannot cut a tree, and of course we don't want to cut trees. But the question then which comes out is that what kind of an industrial model should a state like Uttarakhand, and particularly these 40% people, जो पहाड़ों में रहते हैं ऊपर, ये क्या काम करें? As I said, we are land starved. We don't have land. Another big issue, of course it's a global issue, it's a national issue, but more so for states like ours, is the challenge of migration. And Gopalji knows that very well. And then, if you sort of really बहुत आगे की सोचें, then you have issues of national security. If people will not live in border areas, are we leaving our borders vulnerable, and so on and so forth. But if we come back to the industrial sort of, the economic aspect, migration is one more. And one worry which I really have is also with competitive federalism, because the way I foresee what is happening with competitive federalism is, or cooperative federalism, whatever we choose to call it, that the more progressive states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, the big boys in India, they are the ones who really have the resources and the manpower, and they are the ones who are moving ahead, whereas smaller states are lagging behind. हम लोग पिछड़ रहे हैं. And the gap between the rich and the poor has increased. My apprehension is, Gopalji, in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years, this gap between the rich states and the poor states in the country, I think that there is a strong likelihood that the gap will increase. And then what is going to happen to these 40% of the people up there? Unfortunately, politically, we also have the problem of shifting goalposts. We don't know as a state who we are. Where do we want to go? हम लोग ऊर्जा प्रदेश बनना चाहते हैं, हम लोग कभी टूरिज्म प्रदेश बनना चाहते हैं, हम लोग कभी हर्बल स्टेट बनना चाहते हैं. So we are not very sure of who we are, what is our identity, and where do we want to go. So these are several challenges, and this is a political issue. But then let me come to the last point, which is that what can we do? Is there something that we could do? And here is a humble request to the US Embassy. I was really very happy to hear yesterday that you have an office catering specifically to the northern part of India. And with your sort of good intentions and with friends like Cuts here, my request to you would be that please come to Uttarakhand. Please take one district in our 40% area. Please help us, handhold us. Let us do something together. Let us try and create a model. How can we create equitable wealth? How can we create sustainable wealth? Is there something that we could do together? Attempt to do something together. So, I think I want to leave it at that. And Sir had said that, end with some positive recommendations. So this would be my, call it recommendation, suggestion, sudhav, or whatever you say. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anu. I can see why the Uttarakhand has been upgraded to the 4th status, because it has passionate speakers like you would see who are interested in getting things done. And you made a good suggestion that you'd like the American involved, and I think the one way probably the Americans could get involved would be the smart cities. I presume you have some smart cities. The US is already involved in 3 smart cities in India. They could take another 4th city. I think that will be very, very, very good to see in that. Another point which comes out from your presentation is that should the government of India adopt a differentiated approach like we have on the WTO and other bases, where there is a differentiated approach, where the have-nots, are given better opportunities so that they can come up with the haves. So I think these are the suggestions we should take. I think now my request is to the last speaker, Amit.
Thank you. A very interesting set of discussions in the morning, and I'm just going to pick up the threads from the various speakers, especially what Daniel had actually said and what Amit had actually said. And I'd like to try to pick it up from there. I think the biggest premise, the biggest idea that we need to understand is what is competitiveness. So competitiveness is very clearly about productivity and productivity with which we actually use our resources. That is land, labor, capital, and so on and so forth. So the biggest challenge that we have in a country, and across all states or whatever, is how do I actually use my resources? But then if I really look at the questions that were being asked here, in terms of what is the vision for a state? Is that a big question that we need to answer? Absolutely. The other question that Anujji actually asked was that we have a problem of land. I fundamentally disagree with this proposition that there is a problem of land. I think there is a problem of vision here rather than a problem of land or non-availability of land. So the question is going to be that how do I understand what I need to do with my estate and so on and so forth. There was a bigger question that was asked in the morning that Mohali, or it was iterated, that Mohali is going to be the IT hub or whatever. My fundamental premise, Mohali will not be an IT hub. Do whatever it takes and Mohali will not become an IT hub in the next 10 years, maybe even the next 15. In fact, this was the same proposition that I said about Chandigarh in 2003. 2003, I don't remember the name of the Lieutenant Governor. I was asked to make a keynote address at that point in time. I think so. So at that time, I'd actually said Chandigarh will not become an IT hub, do whatever it takes, and it never became an IT hub. You have small set of enterprises, some 10,000 people getting jobs here, but that does not change anything at all. And why does that actually happen? It happens for a simple reason, that we do not have adequate labor that is available here. If you talk about this obsession of making a place as an IT hub, we are going wrong. Because if you really look at a place like, say, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, they became IT hubs because of the great educational system that existed there. You had close to about 700,000 engineers which were passing out of that location each year. India produces about 1 million engineers each year. So if you really look at Delhi, a place like Chandigarh, what are the number of engineers that pass out here? Whether you want to create a city with migration or you want to do something else with it. I'm from Chandigarh, and I must also tell you one thing, that I dislike the city absolutely to the core. And in fact, I dislike the city. And I must tell you why I dislike the city, because all the Chandigarh people tend to believe that this is a great city. I think it is absolutely a boring, stale, dead city. And it is always going to remain that way, because for a simple reason, that we do not have any vision for what the city can actually be. What does the city have to be? The city, in fact, when you talk about competitiveness, you have to talk about states, you have to talk about cities, and so on and so forth. So if you really talk about the city itself, this city can be a great tourism hub. But we have the authorities here, which I call the idiots, for the bureaucracy at points in time. Because I think there's a very interesting point here. The sum total of IQ of Indian bureaucracy is -1/12. You can ask me, why do I say that? Because the sum total of numbers from 0 to infinity, as per Ramanujan, is -1/12. Very counterintuitive, but that's a reality. So the sum total of all administrators that Chandigarh has actually had in the last 50 years is -1/12. So why do I say that? Because they've never understood what they can actually do with the city. You can actually make it as a tourism hub. You don't have to actually stop people from moving restaurants outside and so on and so forth. We are not really enabling what needs to be done. Having said that, if you really move ahead in terms of understanding how states are going to be, there was a very interesting point that was made that the states are growing at a certain level, or there is a disparate growth that actually happens. It is always going to happen. It's a truth. It's a paradigm truth in the world. If you talk about states in India, there are 6 states which take the onus of growth in this country. Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and so on and so forth. So that is where, and why does that actually happen? Because the movement of people and movement of goods is exceedingly easy out there. Am I actually able to create that movement of goods and people in this state? We are not able to do that. In fact, yesterday there was this Mr. Agarwal, who was from, I think, the steel industry. And he actually makes a very interesting iteration, or a point, that we need to actually create a situation where the steel industry or whatever needs to get some kind of tax rebate or freight subsidy. That's the most illogical demand that you can actually have. Why do we actually not say that we have to understand what is the reality of the location and then decide what needs to be done? Punjab can actually be a food hub, and that's the story. Why can't I say that food processing is something that should actually happen here? But we've had the most archaic rules that are actually existing for making this place as a food processing hub. In fact, governments after governments have actually killed it. If you really look at flour milling industry for that matter, it should have actually been the bread industry, the flour milling industry, or whatever should have actually done exceedingly well here and has not done it. 50% of the industry out here is sick. Why? Because this food policy or the regulation is actually wrong. So whenever you talk about ease of doing business, I have to understand that there is going to be something called as anti-competitive market distortion. How do I remove those distortions? Am I really talking about it? We can talk about big things here, but we are not simply looking at how industry is actually going to do well. The next thing that we have to talk about, if you really talk about labor itself, how do I increase the bandwidth of talent? In fact, there are these university students sitting here from Chandigarh University. I think they are actually being stalled from growth. And why do I say that? Because the moment I see university students in dresses, I feel they're actually getting curtailed of their freedom. And I'm sorry for saying it. So if there is Chandigarh University here, if there is a dean here, please change this rule. You have to give freedom of choice, freedom of thinking to your people. We are not enabling that. In fact, this leads us to a very important issue. If I want to make my states competitive, how do I do that? There are 3 T's that matter: technology, tolerance, and talent. We need to be tolerant to ideas. In fact, let me also give you something very interesting here. There is something called as the atheism index. Countries which are atheist tend to do well. The most prosperous countries in the world are the Scandinavian countries. They do not believe in the idea of God. In fact, when you talk about US, it is 57%, and look, they have Donald Trump today. And we have 93% people who believe in God in India. I personally am an atheist. I feel it is one of the most crappiest ideas given by mankind, called the idea of God. So we need to move beyond. We have to move beyond in terms of acceptance of different sets of views. It's about science. So it is about the issue of how do I bring that change in the minds of people and make them think differently. Am I able to enable that? No, we are not enabling it. So if I really move forward on this whole thinking of the difference between Bihar versus, say, Gujarat. Bihar is at a per capita income of 18,000 rupees, and then you have Gujarat, which is close to 100,000, Goa close to about 200,000, and so on and so forth. So what do I do this? What do I do here? I have to remove that whole disparity that exists, but that can only happen if I understand what a certain state can do. Use a repeated example of Switzerland here. In fact, a lot of people do not realize that Switzerland is about 4 things. They identified 4 things, and they fundamentally work on those 4 things, and they do it exceedingly well. A lot of people think tourism, but there's also something called as precision instruments. They're the best in precision instruments. They're absolutely amazing. The third is finance, and then of course the chocolates. So what are those 4 things that I can actually do in my state? In fact, what we do here is that every state for that matter, whether I talk about the Karnataka government or whether I talk about the Madhya Pradesh government or the Punjab government, they want to do all the 15 things under the sun, and they actually fail at all 15. Identify what are those 3 or 4 things that you can actually do. So if I want to do something local government, make it as a great tourism hub. There is a huge possibility that exists there. Incidentally, countries which do exceedingly well, 80% of their wealth comes from tourism. Let's look at the numbers. Turkey alone, Istanbul alone gets 37 million tourists. India actually gets 10 million. This year we touched about 10 million. So that means there is something dramatically wrong with the way we are actually looking at it. It is only now that we are actually seeing a certain set of idea on competitive federalism and things. If you really look at the present government, I think this government is doing a great job of things. Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile, tourism, etc. But we are the people, as citizens, who are failing the government. In fact, a lot of times I think we always ask what the government is doing, but have you ever asked what is it that I am doing to contribute? Let me give you an answer or a question here. If you talk about Swachh Bharat is a great idea. None of us can actually disagree with that. It changes a lot of things, but we are still making our streets. We are making our places more, what I call, dirty. We are arrogant not to actually accept a certain change. So it is us who are actually problematic. A city like Chandigarh as well, last point, how do you think you can make this city as a great city? Remove your capitalistic ideas. I think Chandigarh is one of the most arrogant places also. That arrogance actually gets reflected in the cars that you drive. The bigger the car, the bigger the status. Shun your cars, be like Vienna, be on bicycles. Why can't you do that? You can certainly do that, but you don't want to listen to it. Because this is something which is, oh, I'm actually a great city. I still remember getting into a conversation with Max Serene. I told Max, like, if you are such a very passionate guy about Chandigarh, be on a bike. Oh, I can't do it. I have a certain status. Come on, I don't give 2 hoots to your status. Right? Your status is going to get defined not by the car you drive, but the contribution you make. So the question is going to be that what is the contribution that I make to my state, my country, and then the competitiveness will arise. And there are so many things that we can actually do. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you have pepped the discussion. I think we needed that pep talk, you see. And it reminds me when you talk of going on the bicycle. I was in Sweden, and I think they're the king of Sweden took pride in going on a bicycle. Because it is again ultimately the mindset. What is your mindset? Is you've given us a lot of ideas, but I think I look forward to listening to from you, to the discussion. What are the 4 things which you think Punjab should do, or Haryana should do? Because I think the seminar is about those states. I think that would be very good to have some concrete idea. you talked of the food processing industry. You know, it taking back to when I was posted in Washington DC in '85. We had the visit by then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and the U.S. Business Council. We were chaired by Don Kender, we CEO of Pepsi, and he said what India could do, open up. And we did open up, you see, and Pepsi Foods was set up in Punjab, but I think failed. It's not because maybe our systems are better, but I think it needs got other things. And ultimately, I think the point which you emerges from your presentation is that each state has to find what are the niche areas where it can go. The difficulty is that we all want to 15 things. I think we should prioritize what are the areas where we can do that. I think with these remarks, I think I open the floor for discussion, for the floor. Please, I think, just identify yourself with that good, not that, because we are keeping a record of who you are, but a glance in getting the speaker. And be pointed, and I think I would like also give the floor to the students. I think you're the future of India. I think you should come out of your, what you call, suits and let us know about your mind, to see where your mind is working. And rather, to accept this challenge and see that Chandigarh or Punjab can come up, you see. And it is not a city, you have to understand the city is beautiful. It is not beautiful because of the Mercedes, you see, and other cars, but it is city beautiful because it has beautiful minds. Please. Yes.
I am Malti Jain here, and I'm from Rajasthan. Rajasthan seems to be mentioned for various reasons in all the presentations. My first remark is to Anushri's presentation. It's an excellent one. You've demarcated North Indian states versus the South Indian states. They are different, there are a lot of disparities in the basic geographical statistics, in resources and things. So the one thing that you mentioned, you've included labor, you've included electricity, you've included transport, land and pollution, environment, you've not included them. It is in these two areas where North Indian states have taken the lead. They've done brilliant land reforms and they've done brilliant on environmental clearances as well. So maybe then the survey could tilt a little here and there in that aspect. And the other thing, to Daniel, you said that you want, there's no point in continuing with clearances before setting up a business. The methodology should be, you should be allowed to set up business and then file your returns. This is exactly the methodology that we've been working in the state of Rajasthan as well. We've been allowing them to file affidavits, but with penal provisions in case there is fudging done there. So we're on the way. So it's not as bad as nothing is going to work here. Things have started and I think we'll see better returns. We've just started there. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Yes. My question is to Mr. Gopal Krishnan. In your presentation, you had mentioned about Mudra loans. And Mudra scheme has even surpassed the scheme of CGTSI because in the year 2016, the target was disbursed of 1,80,000 crores. And in Mudra, you have been able to disburse more than 1,80,000 crores. So my point is that can government do something that they can enhance the limits of the Mudra loan? It is very low, 5 lakh, then the next lakh is 10 lakh and 15 lakhs. If government can consider increase allocation with enhancement of limits for loans, I think it will be able to better serve the traders, small traders and small businessmen. Thank you.
From Lucknow. My first question is to Anushri. I was just looking at the states that you have picked up. And I'm surprised that you are picking up Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, Tripura. Some very similar and some very small for this kind of a comparison. And then you are leaving out a state like Uttar Pradesh. That is one. Another is that whatever methodology you have used, maybe we'll want to take it forward. I will not mind allocating some resources for that. For bringing Uttar Pradesh also, and then look at the kind of comparison that you're looking at. That is one. Maybe we can discuss that. I think very interesting point was made by Daniel when you were saying that why single window and let's have no window at all. I think what is being talked about in India is not some kind of licensing, some kind of approvals. The challenges, particularly the MSCB sector, my experience interacting with them is that variety of taxation related problems, land related problems, they need a platform to maybe pollution control related problem. They need a platform to come face to face with the state or representatives, and that is why that single window is required. So I think certainly your idea is very interesting, very exciting, that how to take it forward. But I think at least at this stage, it will be extremely anarchic if we don't have any kind of a system of interaction. Current problem is that they are not even getting audience with the relevant authorities for settling their very significant issues. So I think that single window will be needed.
I think I'll ask one question from young students. You want to ask any question?
Very good morning, sir. As all the dignitaries said, that Chandigarh is filled of beautiful minds. What I think is all the beautiful minds are going to the existing hubs, that is Bangalore, Hyderabad, Tamil Nadu, Chennai. So what is the reason is it is creating a disparity. I have a suggestion, like I want, even Chandigarh is not, we can't say Chandigarh is nothing. We have Baddi, we have Mohali areas. What we need to do is we need to find out the incentives that we can pay to these areas so that North Indian people, we don't want that every placement goes to South India. So that's the basic reason why the GDP is most accountable to the South Indian states.
Last question.
I'm representing industry. So my question is to Mr. Gopal, rather not question, but rather I have got a reply to him. Yeah, he just commented upon that the compliance to GST is meager. It's not proper. Mr. Gopal, I must let you know that SME has been overlooked while implementing GST. Very foremost thing earlier, when the excise duty used to exist, those excise duties were levied upon a particular slabbed large industry or some sort of medium industry, which have got some sort of quantum of their turnover or something like that. But now after GST, each and every one is under this slab of excise duty. Though the name is not there, but what the quantum of tax or GST has been raised, that excise has been included and has been applied to the SMEs also. First thing. Second thing, so number of returns which are quite tough to handle. And I must let you know, in SMEs, there are no different functional departments. Entrepreneur himself is an accounts officer, he is himself a production man, marketing is being looked upon by him, HR he is himself. SME has to be understood by our government. Yes, definitely I must let you know that for the large industry, GST is definitely a very good thing, but it's a curse for SME.
I think next, please. And also tell me how many more minutes you want on this side.
Okay, I think as a regulator, I think we have still 10 minutes and we can maybe slightly shorten the tea break. Okay, myself, Uday Mehta, I have just two questions and one suggestions to Mr. Agarwal. One point which was raised by Mr. Amit regarding anti-competitive market distortions. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that we have a draft national competition policy which has been lying and gathering dust. A lot of resources have been spent, and that's a very important policy which can be useful to be adopted in terms of addressing policy distortions, which also has a huge impact on markets. So that's a recommendation for the government to take it up and let's revive it. One specific question to Mr. Amit Kapoor, and we can relate to that, that's also part of our findings in terms of why is it that states are not identifying potentials at certain sectors where they can really do well. And in our scoping visits in Uttarakhand, whoever we met, whether the government or the people from the industry, they all said one common thing: tell the government to focus on tourism, rest everything will happen. But why is it that the government's policymakers don't think from that perspective? And last but not the least, it's a general remark for anybody from the stage. Why are we discussing ease of doing business reforms? My simple question is, why have we landed at this stage where we are discussing these issues? Why is it that it's not a natural instinct for any policymaker or a government to ensure that it should be ease of doing business? Because that means you're looking at economic growth, you're looking at job creation. So that's it. Thank you very much.
I think, okay, last one, please.
One of the officials one of the panelists mentioned about officials being unaware about ease of doing business in many cases. But when it comes to industry, it is always said ignorance of law is no excuse. Why then officers are not accountable when you have put certain systems in place, and why you say they are not aware and there's no accountability or anything? One thing. The other thing is, there are very definitions about single window. We have a dual process, we have multiple windows, we have single roof. What is the exact definition, how we define single window? In Uttarakhand, we have a dual process. One is a team approval, then we have the other approvals system there. Then we have the multiple windows where you log in, then you many windows for the departments open out. Then Punjab, we were talking of, we have a single roof and all those things. Then the cascading of labor laws. I'll give you one simple example, like the fire system. Fire regulations are covered under the Factories Act. Then we have the police department also coming out with a separate set of guidelines. It's totally confusion for the industry, whom to follow and whom not to follow. So when we talk of ease of doing business, are we, in real sense, are we really looking at, is it ease of doing business for the MSCs or not? I think my friend mentioned about GST. Sir, you compromised GST. And that is why where we are today as far as GST is concerned. Everyone sat on the table to accommodate everyone, you compromised on GST. The real GST is not there. Had it been the real GST, I think we wouldn't have been facing the problems what we are facing as SMEs today. You have made our life very difficult. Thank you.
Two or three things.
But I think 1 minute each.
Okay, I'll just try to do it in 90, 60 to 90.
No, I don't mind extending if you want to tell me that 2 minutes. That's okay.
Sure. So on to these 2 points that I want to make. In fact, we are just doing this project with DIPP and NITI, wherein we are trying to identify what are the 4 or 5 sectors that each state should focus on. And I think there has to be an analysis, an evidence-based policy that needs to be done. So I think when you are saying Uttarakhand, people just don't understand it. I think this is where tourism is a sector which does not give a lot of incentives to a lot of people. So you know what I'm saying. So that is where the issue is actually going to be, because it makes people independent, less dependent on various authorities to be, and so on and so forth. So that's there. The second point was on that this kid who actually asked this question, oh, why all placements there? Why do you even have to ask this question of placement? In fact, I feel all business schools and all educational institutions should close down their placement cells. These educational institutions are not placement agencies, they're learning institutions. You should become an entrepreneur yourself rather than actually asking for a placement. If that is your youth of today that needs to be doing, in fact, asking for Bhatti is a dead place because it was giving incentives. Incentives should never be given, because whenever you give incentives, the place grows up for a while, then it dies once the incentives are over. You have seen it in Bhatti, you have seen it in Bhuj, you have seen it in other parts of the world. In fact, very clearly, the next policy imperative from DIPP is going to be on Ministry of Commerce, no incentives across states. I can tell you because I've been working on that manufacturing policy with them, and that's where it is.
I don't really have anything new to add, and so I think I made my point earlier. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I would like to comment on some of the issues. One is the cooperative federalism and competitive federalism are at a different spectrum. What the center has to do is to reconcile them. And I gave in my presentation how GST was a cooperative federalism, then state ranking of states is a competitive federalism. Center has this responsibility that we have to integrate both. That's very important. At the central level, one thing I would like to tell you that we went on for a land reform, that bill, amendment to the land bill, which our government failed. That was because it was required. There was consensus at the government level, state, chief minister, etc. wanted that land bill should be reformed, otherwise it is not implementable. But building consensus, I think, is very important on the economic issue that we learned after that, and demonetization, GST, which were more complex reforms, still government managed to do it. That was because at the government level, building consensus on reforms is very important, and that consensus has not yet been built with regard to labor laws. There is a different pulls and pressure with regard to what is reforms, what is contract labor. There are so many issues, therefore that consensus has not been built. On GST, I would like to mention two things. There has been a lot of debate. I can debate a lot on GST, so, but not here. I will not just two remarks I will make that 95% under the composition scheme, 95% of the firms are out of the purview of compliance. Let me make a comment. We can discuss. Point: the collection under the composition scheme at present is only 3,000 crores. So that's an issue which the government is finding difficult to reconcile, and there are 4,000 firms alone in GST regime which are paying 80% of the GST. These are the facts. We can their implications can be looked into. I agree that service delivery mechanism at the bureaucrat level and the government level is important. Some of the states have come out. Madhya Pradesh has taken a lead, but other states have to take this issue. And Mudra bank loan, there are government, in addition to limit working capital requirement of the small and medium terms, government is taking a lot of initiative. One initiative I made on the Trade X initiative, where working capital requirement on bill discounting is there, and other issues are the government is looking into for small and medium scale enterprises, because in Mudra the government is not asking for collateral. That is one of the important, but if it becomes a large amount, limit is increased, then it will become a lot of NPA issues there. Thank you very much.
I think next, I think bullet.
Yeah, I just have I guess one simple point to the comments that were directed to me to help me understand further about how the Indian system works. I'm an economist. I believe in looking at numbers. Look next year at what your easy doing business rank is. Look next year at what your economic freedom of the world rank is, and then the year after that, the year after that. And why? You're not looking at the numbers and the rankings just because it's like, you know, winning a medal at the Olympics. You're looking at the rankings because the more open and market-oriented your economy is, the academic evidence from around the world is, the richer and the more broadly shared prosperity your country will enjoy. That's why, I mean, I'm a libertarian, so philosophically I like economic freedom, but most people are more practical. And practically speaking, if you want a richer country, that the poor people can advance and increase their mobility, upward income mobility, markets are the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll mainly address the questions related to me, and each sort of touches on the concerns I put up. So on your question on, I think, environmental procedures and land. So basically, the way I try to present today's slides were based on the felt concept. So the issues that were in FELT, not all the issues. But even then, one of my slides, I think the fourth slide, talks about hurdles for setting up business. And there you have seen complying with environmental procedure. That's one of the questions that were asked. I mean, this is the main indicator. Of course, we had a lot of sub-indicators. So on that, even on that, North was not well at all. It was the worst. I mean, the North, let me define here the North. The North region was Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan, and Gujarat thrown in there. So that was a problem maybe. So not even then, otherwise you have seen for electricity, I therefore completely took out the states and showed that Delhi was one. Rajasthan, everything I showed clearly. That's one of the hurdles for environmental procedures. And then for complying with the other thing was construction permits, because I didn't do land, but for construction permits, clearly, I mean, North was not willing to do that. So that's one thing, unfortunately. That's from the study we did from the grassroots level, from the firms as well as from the states. Now the question on UP. Actually, as I said, this was done for a study given by the UK government. And they definitely had certain states in mind. The states in which their own businesses were to be functioning well, or where they wanted to go initially. Maybe they will go to other states later on. But these are the states given to us because this was a contracted project. And on the issue, I think, of what you raised, is what I actually was saying, that the grassroots level officers, I mean the officers that need to really implement are not aware of many of these things, because we did survey of these 12 state officials and found a lack of awareness of the actual reforms. And the question of single window system as well, we found that the single window system are supposed to be a single window for most of the clearances, for example, labor. And so on those issues, what we found that even when it was supposed to be a single window system, for example, common application form under single window system for all approval clearances by DIPPs, and that showed that this required many web pages to be opened. So it was not really a single window to go much deeper. Apart from that, even if you file a form and put that form submission, has to be done personally. So you have to go to many departments. And we even checked on that how many departments one has to go in, and in the northern states, the departments were more compared to many other regions.
Well, I think we almost come to the end of the session. I like to make one or two points. One is that I think it is very important, I think, that we have to get a sense of the House, is that there is a need for dialogue. I think dialogue at various levels. And even I would say among the states also, we need a dialogue. I think it's not that all the time they should compete, but there's some places where they're agreeing also, so they could project to see what is required, what's not required, and all those things. This could help us in moving forward. Second, I think is a very important point is which I can get the takeaway, is that we are all promoting conferences. Vibrant Gujarat, vibrant this thing. I think what we need is a real vibrancy in India, where India is recognized as a vibrant country, say, whether it is Gujarat or Haryana or something like that. And that we can do only if we can show results. And this takes me to the final question, which is raised by Uday. Why EoDBs? In fact, I did not ask this question, because if you ask this question, then you could say that, you see, I'm not promoting a seminar, see, because since you are doing a seminar, I presume there must be some justification for that. See. But to me, to my mind, I think this is not the time. I think we have passed that stage of EoDBs. And also, EoDBs again is on some parameters which may not be relevant. I think India is not understand. I think we think we're taking credit that we come down to 100 number or something like that, what is the number, from 134 something like that. I think one go about that. If you look at what everybody is looking at India, because they see India has a future. So if there are some small things here and there, we can, what you call, tweak it to suit the requirements. The people who are coming from outside, they should be able to find their way, I think to find the way, thing like that. And finally, I would say that I think maybe we need to do 2 more studies. I think one that the courts could do, one would be on the states, role of the states in the United States. What they maybe either you take sector-wise or the state-wise to see whether they could be modern. And I think somebody talked Switzerland. I would say Sweden would be a good place to do that. And the other thing would be, I think, EoDB in the United States. I think we should know the other side also. I think if you want to compete or something like that, we should know exactly how they are and what they are doing, you see. And then only we can learn and do together. And thank you very much for this. I'd like to thank the panelists, the audience. I think you've been very good. And also Guts for giving me the opportunity to chair this. Thank you very much, all of you.